Don't know how to look at them, and so that you have a proper canvas in your mind of what you're dealing with. And the disadvantage that we have as a people is our people don't know what they're dealing with. Of course, you know that already, but I'm making this point.
So are you going to be more back here, or, as this one said?
Yeah, I'm going to be back here, and we're going to just be talking. All right? Right?
No.
Declaration of the federal district that they're claiming jurisdiction over people with, too. Keep this in mind. All right? Ready in a second. Islam.
We'd like to welcome you all to the House of Reawakening Minds on this awesome holy day with our instructor, master teacher, Grand Sheikh, Taj Tarik Bey.
Islam.
Let's receive him, y'all.
All right. Tonight we're going to go over the Buck Act. And how many of you heard of the federal district and understand the federal district? How many of you know what it is? How many of you know the nature of its operation in regulating your life and your property and your body and your estate? How many of you understand whether or not it is de jure or de facto? Oh, camera? This is funny. You will be doing programming. You will be, yeah.
Oh, all right. I'm just camera.
Funny, but the point of it is to understand what's been happening to us on many levels. We're going to bring note on the Buck Act. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, how many of you know about House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session June the 5th, 1933? Good, you can raise your hand, D.
Oh, I can raise my hand.
All right. Yeah. A lot of the things, problems that we're having now, even with, a lot of people are doing affidavits and notices to the de facto operators in government, and that always must be qualified because, in fact, they're not your government, although they're a governing body. The unfortunate thing is that people don't know that they are not your government, but usually people reference the United States government the same way you would reference your mother, with that connection. Like she has rightful authority and rightful birth of you. And most people look at the U.S. as that, and even the issue with the tag that you hear U.S. citizen. As a matter of fact, the federal district citizen is the U.S. citizen. And it's actually, although human, they're actually stock, not as humans. They're expendable, and they're used accordingly. And a lot of the abuses that we have and receive as a people that our people march and pray about has much to do with the jurisdictional claims that are actually made under the Buck Act. But very few people talk about the Buck Act. They'll talk about things that are really misdirected information like racism and prejudice, and it keeps people busy, but it is not really the issue, and therefore things mattered within that venue cannot cure the problem, if you get the point. It's a diversionary argument. Sound good, but it's a diversion. So we're going to go over some of these things to make sure that everyone has a little better understanding of what is effectively screwing your lives up and your family's lives up, including all of the things that they're doing relative to traffic stops, stealing people's cars off the streets without due process, giving them foreign bills of exchange to third-party interlopers, which are called tickets, putting surcharges on people, all under the guise of law. And the guise of law means color of law. And color of law means fraud law. And those who are exercising it means they're imposters. And so before we can fix things in society, the nationals of the land and the citizens must be aware of what they're operating with. As long as we continue to argue race arguments and things that are diversionary, we'll fix absolutely nothing. Until our people are re-educated into real politics, true politics, how it really works, not the beauty of it, because it's not beautiful, but the fact of it, and become more and more competent in the things that we do day by day with ourselves and with our families. Many of the successes that our people seek to achieve in the societies and in our communities will never happen. And so one of the things that is a constant with us is, and it's an unfortunate reality, it is pulling the wool off of people's eyes and telling them to take responsibility to deal with reality, unplug from the false matrix, from the false mother. And the false mother is the U.S. Democracy Corporation that was set up in post-1861. And so those dates that you see, I put that there, this is what you must understand. There has been no legitimate operative government on the land in North America since 1861. How many of you are aware of that? Well, how many of you are aware of it now that you've been told? Therefore, now, and the point that I'm making to you is that in much and in many of the things that we discuss in societies, this must become part of your mental canvas of comprehension and understanding when you're dealing with any so-called government personnel or agencies, and understand they're aware of this, but they operate arrogantly, knowing due to miseducation that most of the people aren't aware of it, and therefore makes us subject. And so a lot of the abuses that persons claiming to be government have been inflicting upon us is because they know this and they know that you don't. But yet they're exercising authority of government when in fact they are not. Are we clear? And as a reminder to all of you, as we've shared with you at different time periods, a relook at the Clearfield Doctrine, which is why the Clearfield Doctrine is in place, and why the representatives for the Clearfield Trust Company won that case against representatives of the United States pseudo-government operatives who were suing Clearfield Trust Company over a forged check. The deal is, and our presentment to you, is that we want our people to understand what's going on in the real world so that we can become more and more competent in our everyday activities, as well as when we're interfacing with the foreign European corporation operatives pretending to be Americans and pretending that they are your government, the things that they seem to constantly do not in the interest of the people is because they're de facto. It's not whether they like you or not, or whether they like your color. These are things that are thrown around for ignorant people, rats, imbeciles, and people who cannot handle reality. Also for rabbits. This information is for human beings that are beginning to take responsibility relative to the honor of their mothers and their fathers, that their days may be longer upon the earthland, and the reclamation of their estates, which not only includes lands and property, but rights and liberties. And so we want people to be aware of what they've been asking for. You know how like a lot of people have been asking and talking about rights, and if you ask them to give them a piece of paper and tell them to make a list of their rights, most of them will have an opinion, and half of what they write down may not be a right. And some things that they skip are rights, and they didn't claim. And many things they claim as rights are actually privileges under corporate auspices, having nothing to do with rights whatsoever. And so in order to clear up some of these things, it is not to necessarily tell you everything, but it is to present to you principles where we as a people begin to use our reasoning mind and make discernment with any information that we get from anyone, here or anywhere else. And when you learn maxims or principles, they apply everywhere. They have no bias. Remember, when you're dealing with maxims, principles, stare decisis, res judicata, you're not looking at bias. You're not looking at partiality. You're looking at principles. Are we clear? You're approaching things with a Rotarian complexion, which means universal. It seeks to harm no one, but support the right pre-existing of everyone. And in government, the term loosely used in general is called isonomy. And isonomy, it means equal rights and justice for everyone in society. And that's often referred to as the carpenter's tools. And the carpenter's tools you will see, I'll make it so that you'll know, up here. It's a compass
And a square.
and a square. And that's called isonomy. All right? And it's also in principle of character when they talk about Yahushua in the book in Septuaginta or in the Bible, and they say Jesus was a carpenter, and they make reference to the carpenter's tools. That's the ancient symbol of doing geometric forms, circles and squares. And this is why when you talk about justice, they say being on the square. And when they say alpha and omega, they talk about a complete circle. And then they talk about radii, they talk about portions or marks in the circle, etc. And in the ancient Germanic format of studying the ancient Africans and Asiatics, when they call the great circle the church, that is also the circle. Although, in fact, most people, the priesthood have never really taken most people to church who've been in those buildings because they have never taught them the science. They keep the science for themselves, which is why they're usually got a private plane, $3,000 suits, 2 parishes, and 3 of the women on the choir with Jesus' hair. Well, it's the truth. It's how it works. And people know it, but people deny it because most of us, to be honest, are hypocrites. We need not get into that, but it's just simply the truth. And our families are falling apart. The youth are dying younger and younger. Women struggling, not being compensated for their labor and work and trying to raise children in a society that abuses them and the children. And always sticking them with needles and putting viruses in them and stuff like that and talking about it's for the good. And for the most part, people don't have too much remedy. All of those things that they've been doing under the Buck Act. Now, when things mess us up, we certainly, whether we do something about it or not, or whether we choose to, we at least should know something about what's happening to us. All right, so how many people know that a Social Security card is a barratry instrument for admiralty, contract, cargo shipping, and bank bonds? They don't tell you that, do they? How many people know that when you're traveling up and down the highways, the roadways and highways in your private conveyance, automobile, that is considered by highwaymen as ships that belong to them, that you're renting? Which is why they can tell you to fasten their seatbelt and make you get insurance from Joe, who's their cousin who works for the mob, and they can charge you anything they want to charge you, and if you don't pay them off, they steal your stuff. It's under the Buck Act. How about when they don't like certain people and they want to target certain neighborhoods and destabilize the families, they go kick doors in and take people's children? Buck Act. How about when you send your children to John D. Rockefeller's General Education Board and they stick them with viruses and give them autism and everything, stuff like that, talking about their immune systems and stuff, and women say, don't stick my baby, and they ignore them. And if they interfere, they sometimes throw them on the floor and put handcuffs on them and stick their babies anyway. Buck Act. Because they don't know that the child is claimed as property under the Christian Black codes. And if you got a marriage certificate, they own the eggs in both ovaries. In both fallopian tubes. And any egg that rests in the uterus, they already have claim and a bank bond waiting, which is why they deal with the birth certificate, and you see the doctors be standing by the bedside as soon as women release the shipping goods and put a bond on it, whether you want it or not, and then stick the baby's foot on it, saying that the baby signed it. And it immediately goes to the stock market, 55 Water Street, New York. And then they give it a tag number called Social Security. Buck Act. And then most of the people, it doesn't matter what their so-called religious claim is, most of them be thinking that these people are really government. They're actually human traffickers. And because most people, for so many generations, have been in denial of what's really been happening to our people, in their heart they know that. But they feel so powerless, and they don't even really in their heart believe that Allah, Jesus, Moses, or anybody else is going to come save them from it, which is why they keep submitting to it. And they usually then hide behind religious beliefs to comfort themselves. Not to cure anything, to comfort themselves. Without admitting that the rescue doesn't arrive, if you get the point. Then these same people, when these people have inheritances from grandmom and great-grandmom, from the houses and the land that they worked for all their lives, then the corporate state comes in and steals it and taxes them out of it. It's the Buck Act. Are we clear?
Clear.
Yeah.
And when you interface with them in any of the subdivisional corporate agencies and they treat you with disrespect and disregard, it's the Buck Act. When they do the human trafficking and our people don't submit, and one of the members of the gangs of New York pretending to be police, chokes them on the street until they can't breathe anymore, and nothing happens, it's the Buck Act. And then when others who don't submit to their corruption, and they put them on probation in their POW camps, which are actually private prisons, it's the Buck Act. And it's enforced by the kingship oligarchy that was set up in 1861 with a body of men with a few women tokens that they've adopted just to pacify people, and pretending to be Congress and senators. They're really a kingship oligarchy. Are we clear?
Clear.
So let's read a little bit, and then we'll just, we'll talk a little bit. All right? In order for you to understand the full import of what is happening, and this is in reference to the politics in general, and particularly what happens in certain targeted neighborhoods that are gentrified and a whole bunch of other things that are unique from other neighborhoods. Well, we don't have to tell you about what that is because you already know. What is happening? I must explain certain laws to you. When passing new statutes, the federal government always does everything according to the principles of law. In order for the federal government to tax a citizen of one of the several states, now, as we're saying this, keep in mind, you must already have a background in constitutional law, which should be given to you starting in the 3rd grade. Knowing that most people aren't groomed in civics, etc., we expect for you to reference this, and don't accept what I say, do some research, take responsibility and look at discernment and analyze this. So when passing new statutes, the federal government always does everything according to the principles of law. In order for the federal government to tax a citizen, one of the several states, they had to create some sort of contractual nexus. This contractual nexus is the Social Security number. In 1935, the federal government instituted Social Security. The Social Security Board then created 10 Social Security districts. The combination of these districts resulted in a federal area. Now notice it's an abstract, but they say area as if it's aggregate. Are we clear? So you must recognize that how they usually talk to people, they will talk about jurisdiction in the concept that it's actually aggregate when it's abstract. Are we clear? As an example, as we speak, this territory has an original name that's to the land. Under European colonial operations, they tag a corporate operative name on this area, and they call it Wilmington. Wilmington, Delaware, which is an abstract. Are we clear? Distinguished from the physical land that you're standing on. Are we clear? And the same way, you must understand when they're talking jurisdictional powers, don't get it confused because they present it to you in an argument as if it's a physicality. Are we clear? Also, whenever you're making claims of right for protecting your unalienable rights and your birthrights and issues, you must be always cognizant of the aggregate and the abstract. And this is very crucial in our having a clear comprehension of what I'm saying right now, because if you don't, and if you do not fail to grasp that, you may be subject to a lot of things that you don't know how to get out of. All right? And the reason we're sharing this with you, because we want you to be more effective and more competent when you're dealing in any business activity whatsoever, particularly with anyone who says that they're government or that they have authority. Are we clear? So the districts resulted in a federal area which covered all of the several states like a clear plastic overlay. Can you kind of imagine that? When you're cooking and you put some leftover food in the refrigerator and you put a clear plastic over it, and people start thinking that that's the food. This is pretty much how they've done their corporate entities and claiming jurisdiction over food without the authority to having done it in the first place, which makes them pseudo and de facto, and it's also, you hear the term quasi. So the term Quasi, that would be Q-U-A-S-I, that's one word. Pseudo, which you see up there, P-S-E-U-D-O. And de facto, look at them as synonymous in your activities with anyone that claims to be a government agent, anyone who claims to be an officer. Anytime they even open their mouth and say anything about the U.S. or any of the states of corporate entities, persons or personnel or contractors. It is important that you know these things because the criminal elements that are leading all of them have been accelerating their criminality as of late. And for many people who are asleep on that will unfortunately become more serious victims on multiple levels. And not knowing this, they won't know how to bring remedy. Are we clear? In 1939, the federal government instituted, so every time they say federal government here, think pseudo-federal government, quasi-federal government, de facto federal government. And whenever you're reading any instruments or any news, always put that into your wording when you're reading. That will keep your mind clear. It will purge you. It will baptize you to truth, distinguished from the semantic lies that they're telling, which is how they mind control the masses. Are we clear? Because if you just say the federal government, psychologically, you're establishing it as de jure or real or proper, not thinking or remembering they're a fraud. Every last one of them. I don't care how much they smile in your face. That is your cousin's brother. And that somebody said they elected them. You don't elect anyone here. Anyone here is appointed politically. And any votes that the people take on any level are to keep the people busy. Persons are already chosen. And if they don't want them in there, they will remove them. Are we clear? With your help or without it. Because you're dealing with a kingship oligarchy, you're not dealing with a legitimate republic form of government. The republic form of government was overthrown in 1861. And we need to get over ourselves and start getting real and start looking at some things that have been presented to us over the decades for us to do. As an example, like Noble Drawley told the Moors, helping them in the great missionary work enforcing, bringing our people back into our Constitution for the United States, things like that. Marcus Garvey teaching people government structure and civics, things like that. Yes. And we have very few men and women that have sacrificed their lives to present those types of forums to our people, and therefore our people have been handicapped because they've been busy usually with people who've been selling them belief systems and taking their finances and giving them promises that are never delivered. So we must take responsibility for ourselves, if you get the point. In 1939, the federal government instituted the Public Salary Act of 1939. And you notice how they keep backing up one fraud with another fraud, and after a while most people don't get familiar with this stuff and don't know this is what's affecting you every day. This act is a municipal law of the District of Columbia. Now we don't need to go into it, but now you see why people need to know what the District of Columbia really is, distinguished from just assuming it's a place. It's a sovereign state, city-state, district of 10 miles where criminal operations for the Inquisition takes place in North America to execute color of law, pseudo-law, de facto law to enforce the unum sanctum policy under the Spanish Inquisition from the popes of Rome against the Moors and Yahudi, who are referred to as Moors and Jews, both of which is these people who think that people are crayons, and they think green people and orange people and pinstripe people and black people and purple people, and don't matter what color you are. Those are the heirs to the estate who are under occupation, which is why we have problems. And you know, and we don't need to go into this, that most of our people are trained that human beings are crayons, and they talk accordingly, not knowing that they're right into the Christian black codes of 1724 every time they open their mouth with those brand systems. And it's also referred to as a tacit agreement to the legislation pseudo of the cellophane or that clear plastic overlay. That clear plastic overlay is also referred to as the shadow government, or clear, better referred to as de facto. Now the government knows that it cannot tax state citizens. And what is that predicated on? The Republic's constitution that they overthrew in 1861. So when you're looking at most of the taxes that you're so-called being forced to pay, which are mandatory, every last one of them was a fraud. You've been robbed for generations. Not recently, for generations. In other words, servitude has been institutionalized and the people have been dumbed down so much that they don't even know it. And they live it every day. But they're going to tell you about spirituality, right? So now the government, i.e. the pseudo-government, knows that its operatives, now notice how I'm interjecting in here? You see what it's saying there in the text? And you see me interjecting words? If I interject words and phrases, it's because that's how you need to be thinking. It's how you need to learn how to read through what is called semantic presentments. And this, while allegedly telling the truth, is still a semantic presentment. How do I know that? Because a European wrote this. Because they're still Europeans pretending to be Americans. Stealing your birthright. So now the pseudo-government operatives know that their operatives, agencies, representatives, and contractors cannot lawfully tax state citizens. See how differently worded that? You've got to be able to look at things and interject like that on your own. This is what's going to save you from the semantic contracts. Are we clear? So who live and work outside of the territorial jurisdiction of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, 1, subsection 8.17 of Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Now, in the U.S. Constitution, so in 1940, the pseudo-Congress, kingship oligarchy, passed the Buck Act. And that's set at United States Code of Law 4, 105 to 113. And in 110E, 110E of the Buck Act, hold on. So in the U.S. Constitution, so in 1940, the Congress, the pseudo-Congress passed the Buck Act. And in Section 110, the Act authorized any department of the federal government to create a federal area. So you can see that they assigned people in any of the departments of the federal government arbitrarily just to call something federal and start doing stuff to you. Sounds like due process, doesn't it? I don't think so. You've been processed, but it ain't due. And so there is for the imposition of the Public Salary Tax Act. See, now you got to see how they layer it? Now they starting to tax your salary, your labor. In other words, your sharecropping. Your very labor is now listed as sharecropping, but you see how they hide it? And that is the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939. So when people are working and their wages, and they have all these lists of alphabet soup taxations, that's where it comes from. The Buck Act. Are we clear? Now what occurs, and what has been occurring, is that the average person never contests this. They don't know to contest it, do they? And if you look at how they do it, they'll do one thing one year, set up the tent, and then encroach on another thing based on the fraud that they established the year or two before. Then they'll wait a little while, people settle in, and then they'll encroach again, and this is how they got you to where you are today. Are we clear? Now we can go through this thing all day long, and we can have a list of 18 or 19 different acts that they produced after this that are all attached to the Buck Act, but they don't say the Buck Act. And after a while, the people get, how do you say, overcome with clutter and just start blocking their mind out and then trying to find ways to satisfy the undue, unjustified, unwarranted, unconstitutional, unfair, unequitable, and immoral debt and slavery that's presented to them under the guise of taxation that appears to be legitimate when none of it is. From the door. When they have any so-called court case of any type, whether it's a ticket, whether it's somebody littering on the street, whether it's you didn't have a registration, whatever it is, all that comes under the Buck Act. Are we clear? And none of it is lawful. None of it is lawful. But they've been doing this to people for so long, most of the people think it's law, don't they?
Yes.
That's that encroachment over generations, and they train them. Then when the children come in, the children actually think it's the law because that's what they've been living under. And the parents haven't been schooling them because they don't know civics. And the leaders are usually paid off by the corporate agencies with a 501c3 and other compromised agreements, and they won't teach them. And others are either Masons and Eastern Stars, learn it in secret and won't talk to even their family members. And so, little by little, the corruption becomes the paperwork and becomes the canvas and the wallpaper of society. I.e., it becomes the puzzle of society, the corruption of society, the source of suffering for the people under the guise of, quote unquote, the government. Are we clear? And so they use de facto and pseudo alleged law in order to actually institutionalize slavery, and they do it incrementally so that the people don't know that they've actually been enslaved. They feel it, they suffer from it, but they don't sit around and complain about it. They'll sit around and talk about racism and prejudice, which is not the issue, nor the argument, nor the solution. Are we clear? Now, some of the things that we discuss with you from time to time, your proclamations, your attribute and name correction and reclamation are essentially rightful, unalienable, adverse claims, and also reversionary statements to your rights and your estate made public in order to begin to put brakes on the corruption. Are we clear? Because as long, from a law perspective and a legal perspective, as long as you don't speak up, your rights are considered to have been abandoned, and they operate from that perspective. Are we clear?
Clear.
And because they have so many layers to this, they always send you from one layer to another if you try to make a complaint, which is why you don't get remedy. Because 9 times out of 10, you'll start discussing racism and skin color when you're dealing with the Buck Act and the Christian Black Codes and the Unum Sanctum policy. And then the people, they pay people to march you around the place to complain, to make people think that you're somebody important, and they keep treating you unimportantly. You know, so you walk around trying to convince people that look, I'm breathing, I take up space, I'm somebody, and all that kind of stuff, and they ignore you. Because it's a stupid argument that they were sent somebody, they paid some overseer to keep you busy marching around arguing about things that are totally irrelevant, making you thinking that you're doing something intelligent. Because until you deal with the issue of the problem in law, you're considered incompetent. Doesn't matter. You know? So if your tire's flat and you're on the highway, don't start talking about the content of milk. No, I'm serious, because it's basically what we do. The issue has always been birthright theft, and we keep talking about skin color. Because they told us that that's what you should be talking about. Somebody punch you in the eye and they say, discuss the football game coming up Sunday. Artfully. You know, we start talking about artful ways to talk about the football game. With one eye closed. We're out too much. We really are. Honestly, we are. So the Social Security Board had already created a federal area overlay. Now, it's important that you know this, because when you're making law arguments on your own behalf, you have to know that this is what they're operating on in order to counter them. Are we clear? So we also want you to take notes, because you're going to do some research secondary to this on your own. And what I'm going to do is, on these subsections, I'm going to expand on this in the future to give you even more reference relative to cause and effect. Are we clear? But also to remind you that the greater social, political, and economic danger is you, me, we not addressing it. Are we clear? Because a lot of things that we discuss every day are the result of this. So in law, their position is, how dare you not be familiar with the dog that bites you while you're marching around the community complaining. Because now you're disturbing the peace. If you get the point, and then they get you on that. And it might sound unfair, but that's pretty much how they treat people that are considered incompetent. Islam.
I don't know whether, this may not be relevant, but
It is.
Okay. I got this on my mind because this is so fresh. So today, about 4 letters came to my house.
Yes.
Okay, addressed to my husband, and they were from law firms. They were from law firms in New Jersey, and I could read enough, through the little clear thing to say that it has something to do with a traffic ticket, and so I went off. My insurance is gonna go up. You got a ticket and all these.
That's what they'll do.
But here's the deal: the ticket apparently was paid. Well, all of these attorneys somehow knew he got this going 9 miles over there, allegedly over their speed limit, and sent all these different law firms wanted to represent him.
Yes.
Which shows me that there is a business, connection between getting, why would all these attorneys all of a sudden start sending letters to represent somebody who got a ticket when the matter allegedly was between that person and the state of New Jersey?
All right. Now, what were we doing last week? Yourself and I. As a matter of fact, we were sitting up working until we got sleepy. Working on an article.
Right.
What was that article?
Not the one on the rescission.
The Circle Church.
Oh, the Circle, the Crown. Okay.
The Crown.
Yeah, the Crown.
And very often when we present things here at the House of Reawakening Minds, we're actually building blocks of information that people have to know that otherwise they would not know, because it's sort of like we're caught in this situation where our people have been miseducated and have been locked out of certain prime information for generations, and you cannot, like in a block, re-educate people who are under mind control and don't know they're under mind control. Nevertheless, what you and I were working on and looking at would change your question, but I know that you asked the question actually for the audience.
Absolutely.
But you wouldn't ask why, because you would know why. And in knowing why, you would know how to respond, i.e. Brother Wayne, even if it were not paid, to these attorneys who have no foreign registration operation on the land in breach of the nobility clause of the Constitution. And 9 times out of 10, the mail that he received didn't have a stamp fixed to it. Most of them had those little
Pitney Bowes.
red pasties.
They were red.
That's a mail fraud. And do you know why they do the mail fraud? So that if someone who's wake doesn't sue them for mail fraud. Because because if they have the little fixed United States stamp on it, and they're members of the bar, and they transact that business through the mail, you know, you can charge them with mail fraud. Even though you can charge them with mail fraud with those Pitney Bowes stamps too. So they're protecting their behinds because they know that the court belongs to the Bar Association, not to the people. And they're traffic courts. Trafficking is what? Trafficking? Trafficking? Who do you see walking? Do they got products in there, or do they have humans walking in them trafficking courts? They don't even hide it. But they know that people can't read. They know that the people have been dumbed down for so many generations, they don't know they're on an auction block. And so what you have is bidders who are on the inside bidding on the product.
Absolutely.
There's your answer.
Absolutely. And I just want, because it was just, I've got those, we got them at home, so it was just like so.
They knew before he did.
Absolutely.
Of course.
3 came in today. 4.
You might get another one. Now, here we go again, you all. There are 2 crowns. Isn't this interesting? Is it synchronicity? Mm-hmm. There are 2 crowns that come to mind when the natural people of the land take into consideration their forced peonage suffered under the intersocial affairs invoked by colonialism. The most poignant issues involve the social, economic, and political problems that have and do now plague and hinder the human family in these days. Many of the torts, wars, and social, economic, and political abuses and suppressions of note are presently the norm among Aboriginal peoples suffering the negative and injurious effects of European colonization in the Western Hemisphere and across the planet. One of the crowns of concern has been the Queen of England and the arbitrary practices related to the popes of Rome, the Inquisition, and the unum sanctum church bull policy enforcements, etc. The other crown, less discussed, is the Crown Temple and its past and present membership and operations. So you have Crown Temple members sending mail to your house, bidding on his affairs, and he's on the trafficking block. See how if we really don't understand how things are operating, we don't see things for what they really are. And if no one brings it to your attention, very often we live through these things every day, and it never dawns on us that 1865 didn't disappear, it just became more sophisticated. And guess what happens if they don't forward the extortion payment? They will send out what?
Mercenaries.
A posse and capture the slaves. And steal your horse, except it's your car now. Don't they, you all? and then ransom it, don't they? They have them called impound yards. The Crown, how many of you know what the Crown Temple is today, you all? Raise your hand, look around the room. Support each other. Don't just listen to me, support each other. Look at each other. How many of you know about the Crown issue with the Queen of England under the Secret Treaty of Verona in relationship to the U.S. corporation colonies that the people who don't know government think is a country called U.S.? Look around the room, y'all, see, because y'all got to be talking to each other, not the Taji guy. Because really, you have to fix this with yourself, and you're going to have to fix this with your families. Because as long as your families don't understand, they can't come to your aid when Romans come to your door. Which is why you're here in the House of Reawakening Minds, to clean up a lot of the misgivings, to kind of encourage you to begin to look at reality and not be afraid of what you see, but to begin to take responsibility. And also to recognize within yourselves all that we as a people have been claiming, and I'm going to emphasize that word claiming, to love the Lord, to love our God, to love Jesus, to love justice, to love the books. That we've been hypocrites because our fears and our unwillingness to address things that really injure humanity, we have ignored. And we have pretended everything is all right, because in fact, we have actually cowered under these things and submitted to things that we should have never submitted to. And it is time that we begin to take responsibility and rebut and reject Roman operations in North America and in the world.
Islam.
Which is what you're suffering. And instead of talking belief system, talk facts and start liberating people for real, starting with yourself and your family members. And then developing your thinking critically in such manners as you're capable of reading any instrument, dissecting it, and being able to share it with the children so that they don't grow up into the miseries that we have been suffering. Are we clear? Yeah. And to honestly assess the positions that we've taken over the years with our pretended safety and our pretended salvation while we suffer and our families fall apart. And they steal our houses by the day, and steal our vehicles by the day, and take our people to traffic courts, and put them on an auction block, and then have members of the Crown Temple write letters to your house to represent. A free man and a free woman present themselves. They're not represented, for that is the mockery. Are we clear? But anyway, I'm reading a couple of more of these things, and this is what actually me and Dr. Naila was working with, editing this just the past week. And of course, we've been sharing it with you all who've acquired, the flash drive from her. We've added that to the study drive. Truth needs no apology. The feudal law, governmental, and judicial systems operating within the jurisdiction of the United States of America. So we're talking about jurisdiction. We're not talking about physical land. They make you think it's the physical land. So you must always separate the abstract from the aggregate. Are we clear? Because what they're doing, they're bleeding over the abstract corporate jurisdiction that they created in secret on a piece of paper and saying it is the law of the land, which it is not. Are we clear? So, the United States of America, which are artificial person abstracts and private corporate entities, functioning at both the federal and at the state levels. And these corporate and legacy entity constructs having British Crown colony origins are now owned by the Crown, which is a private and foreign power. Are we clear? So the courts that are operating on the land, Morocco, America, North, under the jurisdiction of the U.S. corporation company, i.e. the U.S. democracy political platform, that political platform, U.S., and not the land, belongs to the Crown. And the Crown is composed of the members of the Bar Association. Did y'all know that? How many of y'all know that? And the bankers. And the bench that the magistrate sits on is really the bank collection table. So when you look at the bench, think bank, because absolutely, and that's not speculative, that's actually what it is. It really is. And if you do a research in law, you will find that the United States Corporation Company courts, the bench is the bank, and he's the auctioneer collecting for them. Are we clear?
Clear.
This is why whenever a quo warranto is requested of them, they will look at you cross-eyed and get very vehemently evil and nasty with you, because you just caught them. But they have backup with armed guards from the gangs of New York that are pretending to be law officers because they bought blue suits that from the finance that they stole from the people, and they call themselves law officers, and they're actually an organized gang that started in New York City, and they made contracts with the U.S. corporation company to destabilize Aboriginal people's families. And they patrol the neighborhoods, robbing the people, planting guns on them, planting drugs, and then locking the people up. That's the truth, researchable. This is why a lot of times when people, out of frustration, not knowing what they're dealing with, and start making complaints on these persons, and nothing occurs, that's why. And then in other instances, when they do get to a point where there has to be some kind of a settlement in one of these trafficking venues that they will call courts, and then the court will issue dictums along this order, and I suggest you all do some research and you'll find this for yourself. And the courts have always declared the policeman's obligation is to the corporation and not to the people. So what happens when people be calling police on their family members? You lucky you call policemen to your house, you be lucky that they don't leave with everybody still breathing. But my cousin, he's kind of drunk in the yard and he's acting a fool, so I'm calling the cops. They come in and shoot him.
That's right.
They didn't have to do that. You didn't have to call them either. Because if you knew who they really were, you wouldn't. You would find out some kind of order in your house and your family to try to get things together for us to start fixing things amongst ourselves. Because every time you call one of them foreign gangs of New York in that you keep thinking is law officers, not knowing that they're commercial mercenaries. Write that down. Commercial mercenaries. And that is a lawful term that actually applies to them, not because Taji guys said so. They are commercial mercenaries. And in the correspondence with Pope Francis with the rest of the world, he will refer to them as commercial mercenaries. So if you know they're commercial mercenaries, would you call them one of your family members? But if you thought they were really officers of the law to enforce Constitution for protecting the people, then you call them because that's what you expect, don't you? What happens 90% of the time? It ain't what you get. I thought he was Happy the Clown. I think that sign on his chest is Ronald McDonald. But he looks like Happy the Clown. I don't think you should have called either one of them and expected good results. Unless you want a good laugh on you. And that's pretty much the truth, unfortunately. So, now let's go down a little bit. A Templar is a member of the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, religious and political order that is also called Knights Templars, Knights of the Temple, and poor soldiers of the Temple. The order was founded around 1118 and organized on the land at Jerusalem, an ancient city at Canaan. Canaan is also known as Palestine, and the area of Jerusalem of Palestine has since 1948 been politically designated as a part of the contemporary body politic and political state now called Israel. So when you look at history and you understand the relationship between the popes of Rome, the crown of England, the transference of that sovereign power by King John to the round church of the Templars, you understand how things are happening to you now, whether it's with the IRS, the Federal Reserve, taxation, income tax, FICA, FEMA, FART, Color Coalition, Your Coalition, NAACP, POME, and all the rest of the alphabet soup organizations and orders and leeches that always drain your community and produce absolutely nothing. And generation by generation, you get poorer and poorer. The children get sicker and sicker. And the people at a younger age, every day, are walking around with canes and walkers. And they haven't caught on yet that they're under military occupation. And these people are not your friends. How many of you know in politics what the acronym BED represents? I'm going to put it on the board. And this is how they operate. And this is true. And they talk about it amongst themselves. You know how like in the Bible, in Septuagint it says, don't go to bed with the harlot? This is the policy of them under these operations. That's their policy.
Can you read it out?
Befriend, embrace,
Befriend, embrace, devour. And this is also why, like in the heading of the Temple Crown, the Temple Church, this is your heading. And you may not see that there, but if you understand this, you can understand that. By rule of mystery Babylon. Just as a reminder to you. Keep in mind that while we're sitting around thinking about morality, they're thinking about how to kill your family off. While we're sitting around thinking about complexions, they're sitting around and they have think tanks figuring out how to steal your estates. While you're sitting around thinking about getting somebody to like you and to think that you're somebody, they're sitting around with think tanks and scientists creating viruses to stick in your babies when you send them to get educated. And then you always continue to lose and sit around and talk about, let's have a meeting because they don't understand us. No, you don't understand them. That's the meeting you gotta have. You do not understand them. Now, first we will note and take account of a little historical background. Now, paint this in your mind, do some more research, you all. Just take some of these notes. And some of you have this on your flash drive, so you can deal with that. And those who don't have a flash drive, you see Dr. Nagi. First, we will note and take account of a little historical background. So now we're giving you some background, all right? The Temple Church was built by the Knights Templar in two parts, the round and the chancel. Are we clear? The round church was consecrated in 1185 and was modeled after the circular church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is located in Jerusalem. Are we clear? So it is an imitation in a sense, if you get the point. The chancel was built in 1240. The temple church serves both the inner and middle temples, see below, and is located between Fleet Street and Victoria Embankment at the Thames River. Its grounds also house the Crown offices at Crown Office Row. This temple church is outside any canonical jurisdiction. The master of the church temple is appointed and takes his place by sealed, non-public patent without induction or institution. And the reason you must know that because this is totally kept out of your venue of exposure on any intellectual or political knowledge level. Because it has much to do with the running of the politics in the Western Hemisphere under European colonial operations. How do the Knights Templar and the members of the Circle Church operate so smoothly without being detected? Attorneys. All licensed bar attorneys are really attorneys. Are we clear? I repeat. All licensed bar attorneys are really attorneys who are doing business and operating at North America and under the United States jurisdiction. These attorneys owe their allegiance to and give their solemn oaths in pledge to the Crown Temple. Their fidelity to the Crown is the established fact and stands as the binding rule whether the bar members admit to it or not, or whether realizing this oath-bound obligatory fact or not. This fundamental truth is simply due to the fact that all bar associations, I repeat, all bar associations throughout the world are signatories and franchises to the International Bar Association, which is located at the Inns of Court at Crown Temple. The Crown Temple itself is physically located at Chancery Lane behind Fleet Street in London, England. Although the bar members may vehemently deny it, not wanting the public to know, all bar associations in the United States, such as the American Bar Association, the Florida Bar Association, or the California Bar Association, as examples, have direct ties. And these, without exception, as with all other bar associations, are franchises of the Crown. So when they send mail to your house, did they say that they were bar members of the Crown of the Chancery in England? I don't think so either. Point is, you come here to the House of Reawakening Mind to be reawoken on things that you may not be woke about and reminded of things that you might have forgotten. Because we have to constantly be diligent and aware and deal with discernment every day of our lives, because they have traps in the house, out the house, and on the side of the house, and even on the toilet. Are we clear? And when you send your children out and deliver your children to them, don't expect your children to grow up healthy and wise, because both of those particular things are being addressed by them to neuter it. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact. So if you love your baby, start getting together and think of something different real quick. I know it's hard, but if we're so miracleized, we keep talking about, and we're so godlyized, we need to come up with something, because what you're doing, you're sacrificing your babies. And I know it's unfair, and I know it's hard, and I know we're trying to survive. However, do not ignore the fact that they're not your baby's friends. And don't let them stick your babies. And don't let them keep them in rooms where they're not supervised, because they eat them and they mess with them too. And they commonly disappear them. Now consider this. Do you, any of you, recall and recognize why professors, teachers, and politicians at North America obfuscate and with convenient omissions and continue to avoid teaching about or discussing publicly the absence of the original Article 13, being the nobility clause and being a prime substance to the Constitution for the United States of America? You're aware of that, the nobility clause? How many of you discussed the nobility clause with your children in your house? How many, if it was brought up as a discussion, can discuss it competently without looking up in the corner of the room trying to pick straws? Can you speak on it as clearly as you can? 1 and 1 is 2? As smoothly, as quickly? And if you can't, go do some research and get yourself grounded again, because you're going to need it, because they're going to be, well, they are already liquidating your estates. And so that nobility clause is being of prime substance to the Constitution for the United States of America. And does it not become obvious as to why the original nobility clause forbade and disallowed members of the bar associations, attorneys, lawyers, and esquires to hold any public office of trust in the United States? Does that come up as conversations among your family members or people around and friends when they're talking about the politics and the politicians and the mayors and the councilwomen and councilmen? And 90% of them is lawyers and esquires, which means they've taken over in violation of law, which is why you don't get due process, because they're there to overthrow the republic, not to support it. Are we clear? And for those of you who may need more reference, go look at House Committee Report 1952 on the bar associations, and you do that in your own spare time, and I think that'll answer a lot of questions that might arise at this point of the conversation, which we will not get into. And which is also why when you come here, we always tell you bring a paper and pencil, because everything can't be addressed on the floor logically. And so you're going to have to take responsibility to educate yourself and your families. So we share certain point information and key information, expecting you as grown-ups, that's what we used to call them when we was growing up, to take responsibility. All right?
Can we get you to?
Excuse me,
now,
just repeat about the Bar Association again.
Say it again?
Repeat about the Bar Association again, the date, the year.
Oh, for those who, a lot of questions would arise at this point in our conversation. So do research in the House Committee Report 1952 on the Bar Association, and that'll clear up any questions that you may have relative to the assumed legitimacy of these operators, who the masses keep thinking are there to help protect people's rights under constitutional law, when they're actually there under the guise of helping, but really their mission is to overthrow the republic, which of course they did in 1861 anyway, which is why we're talking about the Buck Act today. How they systematically encroached. But the point of it is, again, is to tie all this back to the Crown Temple. You see? Because again, we always think about only the Queen and the abuse of the Aboriginal peoples around the world under the Inquisition operations. And not think, and how do they hide the Trojan horse in your face? They are members of the kingship oligarchy who have been posing as congressmen and senators since 1861. And they're members of the bar associations and lawyers that our people have been hiring every day thinking they're going to get treated right. And they're right in your face. And they're actually attorneys, members of the bar, members of Knights Templars, etc., members of the Circle Church, enforcing the Unum Sanctum policy, members of the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, which is guised to the public as Christian church. And so the people, unbeknownst to themselves, don't even know that most of them are funding their own enslavement through Reverend Jones, who they think love Jesus. And some of them do it consciously, some of them do it unconsciously, but yet they are all pledged actually to the Pope of Rome, not to Jesus. But the name is beautiful, and so people throw it around loosely. And then plus give people their lunch money. And so the de jure Republic, United States of America, which was and is the legitimate constitutional body politic order of government, must be distinguished from the illegitimate and de facto United States all cap and U.S., i.e. United States Incorporated, and their feudal law democracy platforms post-1861. These imposter political entities were formed after the rebelling Congress for the United States adjourned sine die and secretly established the unconstitutional corporate platforms that thereafter facilitated their private kingship oligarchy. The commercial human trafficking democracy order and their pilfering color of authority misprision operations, and these are more contemporary political activities, and the colorable legislation associated with them ties back to the Crown directives in the background. Much of their work is veiled within the operative works of the bar associations, lawyers, attorneys, and esquires, and with their secret connections to the bankers operating at North America and around the world. So they're in your face every day, aren't they?
Yes.
And you never suspected Trojan horse, did you? See, one of the keys is why they're so successful, because the people don't know what they're dealing with. The people are assuming one thing and they're getting another. See why it's worked so well for them? See why the European communities are prosperous and our communities are falling apart? While their communities are well structured, our community's got a church on one corner and a bar on across the street. In almost every 4 or 5 blocks, even in the poorest cities. Reverend Jones is doing pretty good though. It's an uncomfortable truth, isn't it, you all? But can it be denied? Can it be denied?
No.
The 4 ends of the court. The ends of the court, the 4 ends of court to the Crown Temple use the banking and judicial system of the City of London and is a separate jurisdiction platform. Are we clear?
Yes.
It is a sovereign and independent territory which is not a part of Great Britain. This and that, political fact, is just like Washington City. The District of Columbia was called in 1800s as a political body which is not a part of the North American states, nor is the District of Columbia a state within the organic United States Republic. The District of Columbia and its political platform was established to extort from, to defraud, to coerce, and to manipulate the American people. Its operations are dedicatedly feudal in character. These fleet street bankers and lawyers are committing crimes in America under the guise of sovereign authority and under a color of law. You see the definitions for legal and lawful below. The bankers and the lawyers, and they're bracketed because that must be, you understand what I'm saying? They're front, are known collectively as the Crown. Repeat, you all, and you got to get this through your head. You got to understand why they send that mail. The bankers and the lawyers are known collectively as the Crown. Did anyone ever tell you all that? Now, listen up, y'all. When you start talking to these fellows operating at North America, start referencing them as Crown members in your legal correspondence. And they will kind of be like taken aback, and then they'll try to front and try to be fair with you because you just pulled the wool off them. See, but as long as the people don't know that they're really attorneys under the Crown Temple Church of London, they can be arrogant, steal all your finance, drain you, don't give you service, and then also they'll tell you that they're officers of the court. Why? Because they own it. This is why over the years, when we make reference to things that you all need to know, we present to you the word leave and send you to Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, and it'll tell you when you hire a lawyer what? You admit the jurisdiction of the court because he's an officer of the court. And his allegiance is to the court, not to you. Right. Therefore, he's what? A bounty hunter with a tie, and you just hired him. And it's a human trafficking venue, and you be thinking you going there for justice. Are we clear? So the fleet street bankers and lawyers are committing crimes in America under the guise of sovereign authority. So that means color of government, doesn't it?
Yes.
Color of office, doesn't it? Color of law, doesn't it? Now you see why they call our people colored people? Because they're the target. And our people think it means identity of Africa. Because their leader guys told them that. Oh, boy. So the bankers and lawyers are known collectively as the Crown, and the Crown's operatives and members in pretext and guise are acting as lawyers, whilst their members are actually Templar bar attorneys and are not lawyers. Attorney and attorneys are derivatives, of attorn. And that's from Old French. Attorney meaning to transfer to a point. From Latin adverb to torma and term. In law, to turn over to another. So what you think that they're helping you, and what they're doing is turn you over to that magistrate for auction. Well, he's representing me, dummy.
So.
At that point, you're a piece of cardboard. Guess what happens if you start opening your mouth? They charge you with contempt because cardboard ain't supposed to talk. It's like walking in that room with a poster that looks like you. You start speak on poster. And they say, everybody turn around. What? It's in contempt. Talking poster. I got my rights. I don't think so. They'll be looking for a little one of the recorders in that poster because they ain't supposed to be saying nothing. And that's what happens when you're so-called represented. Are we clear? Why they be telling people to shut up? Because they're on the auction block. They think they're in there for their rights. Telling you. So the Crown's operatives and members in pretext and guise are acting as lawyers whilst their members are actually temple bar attorneys and are not lawyers. All right? Y'all got that? So the other crown. Now, crown essentially, and this is conceptually, this is the establishment of what it is so that you can understand the multiple facets. Are we clear? Crown essentially refers to the sovereign power in a monarchy. Are we clear? And especially in relation to the punishment of crimes. Felony is an offense of the crown. Crown is also an ornamental badge or regal power worn upon the head, by some sovereign princes. Are we clear? Also, the word crown is frequently used when speaking of the sovereign himself or herself, or of the rights and of the duties of the prerogatives belonging to the sovereign. That is in any affair that the sovereign may address in general. Are we clear? So when you refer to the crown, you're dealing with both the adjectives and the acts. All right? The present day Queen of England is not the crown. Now this must be explained to you because we know that she is, but we must understand name only type thing that's happening. All right? So the present day Queen of England is not the crown operating in the absolute sovereign perspective as we have all been falsely and traditionally led to believe. The issue is not that the same has not been the case. Rather, we must know about the other operative crown in that it is comprised of the bankers and attorneys. Are we clear? And you got to keep this in your mind so that you'll stay clear in all activities. And also while we try to encourage you to study law and history together. Because you're going to have to start taking responsibility to protect yourself. Because these people are in place to rape you. They're not there to circumstantially meet you. They are in place to rape you. Their business is human rapery. Not peripherally, not circumstantially when something comes up. They're in business for that purpose. And the U.S. democracy platform set up in 1861 was established to solidify that function. Not circumstantially, but by fact. Are we clear? Therefore, you must be diligent. Indisputably, we've been negligent for generations, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because we have not addressed these things. We've been marching all over the place and complaining, talking about keep hope alive, give me a peanut butter sandwich too, because I know the Lord and all this stuff. And you don't get a peanut butter sandwich to kick your keisters, steal your house, throw your cat out, and gentrify your neighborhoods, and we march all around the place. And while we can now count generations of destructions and broken families, and of course, being irresponsible as we have been, always blaming on the devil, rather than look at who's really doing it. The Romans who've been occupying your land. And we've been calling them Americans, and they're really European occupiers under unum sanctum policy, Spanish Inquisition, and European colonial operations in the Western Hemisphere, and that's how you should always speak of them. Not necessarily with hostility, but just with truth. Are we clear? And when people speak to you of them in any other form, correct them on the spot. Failure to have done so is why many of your children are suffering now, and why you're suffering now, because they've been assuming the status of sovereign, which comes under the legal title white person, that you didn't know has nothing to do with complexion. There's another reason why you must know law and history. And so, while we may ask others to do this, that, or the other for correcting things in society, the one that you really have power to vote for to make a change is called self. And if you're not willing to address yourself and change your language, things you say, things that you comprehend, things that you understand, overstand, understand, then you can't command it of another, even though that other may be enmity to you. You can't complain about the devil if you do not seek to do good works for the sake of good, not because you want a sandwich. Is that fair? So therefore, do unto others as you have them do unto you. As a rule, not as some biased opinion because you belong to some club. Is that unfair? All right. So, those attorneys and attorneys are members of the Crown Temple, and this has not been taken into consideration by most people. And this naivety that exists amongst our people, which you already know, has much to do with the controlled education platforms. See the philosophy page of the General Education Board of 1902 as set up at North America and founded by John D. Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates. You all already know that, so we don't need to go into it. Also consider the secret pledges of the politicians and the clergy who you've been trusting. Both those club members are also associate honorary members of the Crown Temple Church. See why they're always hiding behind Jesus? So that you don't think about this. See, they always say Jesus, never dawns on you that this is where their real membership is. And everybody knows this but us. Is it any wonder why everybody comes to North America, starts making economic and political successes, and our people fund it all and don't catch on, and they keep catching it? Now, is it not true? Is it not commonly provable and known that people come from different nation states from around the world, come in certain communities, get empty houses that the people in the communities can't even get, and within 6 months of wearing some of these saved people, braids that belong to somebody else, who somebody sold their hair from some other part of the world, someone else's eyelashes, and some toilet paper of different grades, from soft to hard, and some Bounty napkins and stuff. Oh, soap powder too. And blunt paper, and 40 ounces, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And get wealthy. And our people still ain't caught on. But they saved though, ain't they? You know, our hypocrisy must stop. And if we don't love ourselves, let's start loving our children. Let's stop being so selfish for the now and set some legacy for the generations to come. Is that too much to ask? And so their relationship is to the secret tree of Verona when reviewing history and law, particularly at North America under the present feudal, de facto, and corporate U.S. democracy rule and jurisdiction. And so we are looking at layered or covered up truths and noting timely events and activities which are generally unknown by, not discussed around, or shared with the general populace. And one of the less known facts is that the monarch aristocrats of England, who are usually assumed to be the crown exclusively, have not been ruling sovereigns since the reign of King John circa 1215. All royal sovereignty relative to the old British crown since that time, 1215, has passed to the Crown Temple and Chancery. Now, understand this, whenever you're in one of those rooms that they call courtrooms, you see that fence that they have around that? That area beyond that's called the Chancery. How many people knew that from a construction perspective? How many of y'all knew that? And did you know that when they steal these people's property under the unum sanctum policy, they send their houses in foreclosure to Chancery Court? And how many people ever notice the relationship? They hear the word and don't know the relationship. Now I'm showing you its relationship. So you see how they're doing things right in people's faces, knowing that these people don't know what they're dealing with? That's why you're here at the House of Reawakening Minds. You're here to take responsibility. Are we clear?
Yeah.
And so all royal sovereignty relative to the old British crown since that time of 1215, and you think Magna Carta era, you see? Past. Now as we go back up to the beginning part, as you can see, the Bar Association members and the bankers comprise the Crown Temple Church. So they're a body of physical, organized men, and the masses keep thinking of building in London. It's called Trojan horse technology. Subtle, blunt, in your face. And so they fart on you, and then they write an article telling you it's Chanel number 5. And arrest anyone who disputes it under a color of authority waged against people of color. And they ain't caught on yet. Dr. Nagi.
It's knowing, how does knowing these historical facts, once one knows these historical facts that you bring to us, how do we go about bringing this before, say, if someone has to go before their court?
Yeah.
How does one use this knowledge to free oneself from the tyranny of this deception?
Right. Now, rule in law. What is, this is to the floor, and keep your point and bring it up again so we don't lose the heart of the question. Because I'm going to give you a long answer. As usual.
Good.
Anyway, in the rule of law, what is the law that trumps the canon law upon which the double stock trust that indentured these people has its root? And that is considered to trump the canon law, trump the Roman law, trump the ens legis operations. What is that law called?
Common law.
And it relates to de jure constitutional principle. What is that law?
Common law.
Say it again.
Common law.
They didn't hear you on the, they didn't hear you on the, they didn't hear you around the
Common law.
Common law.
The common law. Caveat. In law, when you go into a law book, what is the nature upon which the common law is recognized when a being enters into the chancery and invokes the common law? And I'm sure that many of you who have studied law and jurisprudence or social science has learned from time to time an emission of this following statement coming from certain magistrates to some persons who perfected different forms of claims in those venues that they're calling courts, which are trafficking auction blocks. As an example, even with one European woman that y'all know familiar as of late, and she's not the only one, but this one hit the news very strongly, and so I'm not going to say her name, I expect you to research it, and she perfected her UCC claims, and authentication of the birth certificate and all these other processes, and as soon as she went to make claim on that World Global Estate Trust with her piece of the action, they locked her up, took everything, and removed her family and everything, and when they had ecclesiastical court, they've been telling me all about ecclesiastical court. They closed the doors, she didn't have no representation, no nothing. They tried to disappear her. That's what's really in operation. Ecclesiastical court? The court of the Pope. So who is behind this? The God of this earth. What did Yahshua remind you all of in the book of Thessalonians 1 and 2? When I was yet with you, didn't I warn you and tell you of these things, that they would do what? Climb upon the throne of God, claiming to be God. So you're dealing with the God of this world being enforced by the members of the round church and the chancel, coming from the Popes of Rome to the District of London to Washington, D.C., exercised and enforced by the Bar Association with its Roman soldiers called Fraternal Orders of Police. In your face. And y'all been talking about they your government. Now, what do you do with that information, Dr. Naila? Consciousness is represented by this statement in Septuaginta. Being born again with a new mind. And when you have a new mind, you think different. Is that not true? Is that not logical?
Yes.
Knowing that culture's in the language, you change your language, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if culture's in the language and you change your language because you're now awakened or you're conscious more than you were yesterday, you change the circumstance. Why? Because the word is first.
That's right. That's right.
And the word was with God.
The word was. Yes, sir.
And the word
Yes, sir.
was God. At what point you didn't get that? That etymology is key, and why they do not teach etymology to our children, and why our children are registered in documents all across North America, right on up to the parents, as having an average reading level of a fourth grader. And then they keep losing, but they claim to be saved. They know the Lordeth, don't even know it's the Lords of London, because they can't read, and too arrogant and self-righteous to admit that they're handicapped. Therefore, if you don't admit an injury, you can't fix it, can you?
No.
And the circumstances of our communities tell you everything, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now back in support of your question, Dr. Naila. In law, the foundation upon which the common law is recognized in courts around the world is your capacity and allegiance and association to the ancient traditions and customs of your forefathers from time immemorial. But guess what? If you fail in that, you fail in the common law, because rights and liberties are heritable. Therefore, in law, if you honor not your mothers and your fathers, your days are shortened on the earth, and laws and liberties of inheritance apply not to such persons, for they are declared by law to be colored. That means they're a semblance a simulacrum distinguished from that which is real. They have no heirship. Now you ask me, what do you do with this information?
Yes.
So when you know those things, one makes discernment because one has now reference information. That means you will talk different. You will think different. You will look at the instruments they present to you with different eyes. And though you may have shades on, you can see. Now you know that that person is not a judge.